So hi there, my name is Elizabeth. I'm from the Wade and Wendy team, and I am one of the conference organizers. We're very excited about today's conversation, how video can improve hiring. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Colin Danaher, VP of Sales at TellView, who will be giving today's talk. So enjoy and make sure that any questions go on the right-hand panel on chat underneath the session tab. And I'll also be posting a link to our LinkedIn community where we can keep the conversations going after the conference.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Good afternoon. Good evening to everybody, depending on where you are. I saw Eddie jumped in the chat from New York. So welcome, Eddie and others. As a quick introduction, and thanks, Liz, for that. My name is Colin Danaher. I'm the Vice President of Sales at TellView Incorporated. And I'm excited to spend a couple of minutes with you all today. I wanted to give a little bit of a background on my career. I've been in the talent acquisition space for the entirety of a number that's just getting bigger by the day. I've been working for 22 years, and all of that time has been spent in talent acquisition. I spent the first 16 years of my career in the recruiting field specifically. I worked for a staffing company during that time, and I bring that up and it's relevant for the purpose of this conversation only because though I have spent a long time in sales in a variety of different capacities, my view into talent acquisition has always been one from a recruiter. It's where I started. It's where my heart has always been, and it's where I've always been in terms of a trade. So the session today, we're going to walk through a use case for a couple of customers that TellView has. The session today is dedicated to video, as you all are aware. But I wanted to frame it up maybe a little bit differently. So video is a tool, and there's a lot of companies that provide it today. So in many ways, it's a tool that's becoming a commodity. As I said before, different companies offer it for different things. TellView offers it. We offer it specifically for talent acquisition. But again, I want to come back to the idea that tools are tools. They're all pretty good, and so is ours. But the tool itself, video, is not necessarily the key to the use case that I'm going to share with you today. It's how our customer utilized the tool to make a really good process that they actually already had in place even better. So if at the end of this 20-minute session, I'll try to get you out of here in 15 if I can. If there's one thing you take away from this, I think it's more about the process. It's an idea that we can always evolve and improve as recruiters and recruiting organizations. And tools are here to help you accomplish that. But the tool itself is not necessarily the achievement. It's the mechanism that allows us to enable change inside of the recruiting process. A quick agenda. You invited a sales guy to a call. So a sales guy is going to talk about his products. I'm going to give a high-level overview of the TellView platform. From there, I'm going to frame up the use cases, and then I'll give you the details of the case study that I'm going to provide today. We'll go through what they did, how they did it, and then at the end, we'll cover the results and the ROI as projected from our customers. We'll talk about a couple of video best practices after that. And then at the end, I'm not sure if this presentation will be shared broadly with those that attended today, but there are a number of resource tabs that you can link into once receiving the presentation. So this is the TellView platform and at a glance. And being invited to a recruitment automation conference was exciting to me in particular for a couple of reasons. TellView, in summary, is that. It is a SaaS platform that is intended to automate various components of the recruitment process. What's more, we allow you to do this all digitally, meaning that while the platform was built before this, I'm not sure what we would call this era, the COVID era, I guess is what we're in. The platform has been around for many years, and it wasn't built for a time like this. But the truth of the matter is there's actually a better use case for digitizing your recruitment processes today than there ever has been. So there's additional value in a framework like this, and this use case, while prior to COVID, actually pertains to what we're going through today. I'll touch this quickly. Our platform has a number of different modules moving from left to right. We've got a resume parsing tool, powered by artificial intelligence. It'll allow a recruiter working on a couple of different recs to receive 1,000 resumes, and the AI will match it to the requirement and sort them from top to bottom, 1 through 1,000, what calls the recruiter should make first. We've got an assessment platform. We've got a remote proctoring function. We've got a coding platform for technical folks that you would be assessing for candidates for your organization. We've got a behavioral insights tool that would allow you to assess the non-technical traits of a candidate through the process. And then we've got 2 different video components as a part of the platform. So the use case we'll talk about today is going to cover video interviewing, one-way asynchronous video interviewing. It's also going to cover 2-way live interviewing. And then there's going to be a little bit of remote proctoring that's sort of sprinkled into the use case. So I want to get everybody's sort of mind thinking in a certain direction. I'm going to share with you a couple of questions that we were asking our customers. Quite frankly, our customers were asking themselves before we went in and sort of revamped the recruiting process that they had. So the first question is, what if the process was too slow? And as a byproduct of the process being too slow, we were losing great candidates along the way. What if the candidates that we were able to hire didn't have a great experience along the way? Was there an opportunity to make that better? What if the recruiting and interview process was altered in a way that could allow it to move faster and at the same time creating a better candidate experience? So the 2 customers I'm going to walk you through did just that, and here are the stories. So let me tee this up for everybody. So we've got 2 customers that had similar needs, similar things that they wanted to enhance, that they wanted to change, and they took 2 decidedly different approaches to do this. So these 2 customers share one thing in common. They're both really big, but they're both in the IT consulting and services space. On the left, we had a customer that took a video-centric interview approach to getting assessments incorporated earlier in the interview process. This is a US multinational IT corporation. They have about 300,000 or more employees today. The second use case on the right is a customer that used an element of video, and I'll describe that a little bit later, but they took more of an assessment-driven approach. And this is an Indian-based IT services company that today employs more than 150,000 people. What I'm showing you now is a pretty generic recruiting workflow. If we've got recruiters on the call, this is probably similar to what you do today. And while it's a generic workflow, and there were some subtle nuances between the 2 use cases, this is a good encapsulation of what these 2 customers were doing from a recruitment process today. As you can see, it's very standard. And for the recruiters in the room, you would probably look at the bottom right-hand corner here and think, man, 26 days time to hire is pretty good. And that's something that I'm pretty excited about. But both of these customers felt like there was a way to optimize. Eddie, you just asked a question. Are we talking about pre-recorded video interviews or live videos? We're actually going to talk about both because different use cases actually used one and the other, and I'll walk through that in a second. So what did we change during this recruitment process? The first thing that we did is that the traditional first round technical interview, formerly it was a face-to-face interview. So we changed that and we made that first round technical interview an assessment. Now, again, we had 2 different use cases. So one customer made that assessment a one-way asynchronous assessment that they would take on their own. The other company wanted video enablement early, so they took that. And while it was not live, it was a 2-way video, but also focused on the hard skills assessment. So in the 2 different use cases, they used 2 different tools. What they did, though, as opposed to just having this be a first face-to-face interview, is they focused on the assessment first, the hard skills first, and the subjective sort of qualitative interview followed down the road. The second thing we did is we took this second round managerial interview, and instead of it being face-to-face, we moved it to video. We did the same for the third round video, which was a general HR overview before the candidate was ultimately offered a position and onboarded. So the second and third changes were done for a couple of different reasons. Number one, logistically, it was just easier to arrange these things and expedite them in a timely manner. The idea of checking schedules and having a candidate need to buffer in either travel time or driving into the office. Logistically, we moved these to video just to expedite the process. The other takeaway that both customers wanted is they wanted to be able to save this information. So while one customer just did an assessment in a one-way asynchronous video, while the other customer did a two-way video interview assessment, while those are slightly different use cases, one takeaway that both companies wanted is they wanted a repository for the purpose of being able to use it internally. So as an example, in the live two-way interview, if one manager who was not available at that time, but who was a part of the decision-making process was not present, they could simply share that video as opposed to asking the candidate to come back and perform another interview. So what were these two companies hoping to accomplish? We touched on this a little bit. On the left side of this page, you can see that this is the company that did two-way video interviews as a way to assess candidates in the first stage. On the right side, we've got companies that used one-way asynchronous video simply to provide an assessment to the candidate. On the left side, here's the things that they wanted to accomplish. They wanted to assess the hard skills first, and they wanted to do it in a consistent manner. Now, you would say, this is a two-way interview, so the manager is still in control of what questions they asked. This company actually used the two-way interview to assure that the managers were consistently asking the same questions all the time. So there was an apples to apples comparison to every candidate that was actually going through this stage of the interview process. That was number one. Number two, the thing that they wanted to do was while they were asking these questions, they wanted to simultaneously be able to assess the candidate's soft skills throughout the process. This was sort of a futuristic thing for them. They were hoping if they could be successful in accomplishing that in this first interview, they might be able to potentially eliminate the need for a second managerial interview down the road. The third thing was they wanted to streamline and improve the candidate experience overall. And by having this on video meant that they could share the video internally with other managers, as I referenced earlier, as opposed to asking the candidate to come back for yet another interview because one of the hiring managers wasn't available. And the last thing they wanted was they wanted to be able to reuse this for future usage. So they were finding themselves in a scenario where they would have multiple candidates go to a final interview. And just because they could only offer one candidate the role doesn't mean that the other candidate wasn't qualified. So they were hoping to create a repository that they could use against future requirements. Would the same candidate be available and potentially interested down the road? On the right side, on the assessment piece, there were really three things that they wanted to accomplish through this process revamp. One was they wanted to create a larger pool of candidates who were technically, now remember, this is an objective assessment, that were technically qualified to do the job. By having a one-way asynchronous video done early on, they were able to increase, or they wanted to be able to increase the pool of candidates that were qualified. The second thing is they wanted to create an audit trail so that they could identify the fact that when a person was taking the assessment, it was the same person taking that assessment who was also showing up to the next stage of the interview. Now, by itself, a one-way asynchronous video does not allow you to accomplish that. As I referenced earlier, we have a remote artificial intelligence proctoring software that they included in this one-way asynchronous video, which was capable of ensuring that it was the same candidate who was taking this one-way assessment as was showing up later in the process. So they had a documented audit trail to ensure that it was the same candidate who was involved in multiple stages of the interview process. And the third thing they wanted to accomplish was the same as the video use case. They wanted to be able to reuse this information for candidates that might be a good fit for other requirements moving forward. So as I mentioned, this is the recruiting workflow that we started with. Once we did a needs analysis and an assessment of what this customer wanted to accomplish, we recommended a couple of things. Instead of a first round technical interview, as I've alluded to a couple of times here, We did either a one-way asynchronous multiple choice or coding test, or a two-way video interviewing. So this is what we recommended at this stage. They would then go to a round 2 live interview, but this would be conducted over video. They would go to a third live interview with human resources, but again, this would be conducted over video. We projected through our needs analysis that we could actually reduce the time to offer by 11 days. So how did we do against that? Here's what we actually accomplished. And there were a couple of things that we didn't necessarily anticipate going into this that were positive outcomes. The time spent screening resumes and moving them into the interview process actually decreased. And we believe this was a form of the following function. Recruiters were no longer looking at resumes from a qualitative perspective to understand where the candidate had worked previously, what sort of an environment it was. All they were assessing the resume against was the hard skills needed to do the job. So that reduced the time to screening by 1.5 days. One of the positive outcomes was they were able to eliminate, in the one use case where the customer was using video for the first assessment, they were actually able to eliminate a stage in the process. So while the combination of 2 days and 3 days, totaling 5 days across 2 interviews, is what we expected we could accomplish, we were able to compress this into a single instance, which between scheduling and execution of this took an average of 4 days. The live video with human resources took another 3.5 days or so to accomplish, just because of the logistics of scheduling, et cetera. The end result is we were actually able to reduce their time to offer down to, roughly speaking, about 12 days. So you can see the ROI here on this slide. And this is an actual slide that we presented to a customer during their most recent QBR. We actually just came to the end of our first year in partnership with them. We were able to reduce the overall time to offer by 54%. So what does a faster process mean? It means a couple of things. Number one, it means the hiring managers and the process are spending less time. They're not always having to participate in the interview. They can view the video on their own time at their leisure. So it's requiring less of the actual hiring manager's time in the interview process. Recruiters are spending less time on rework, having to go out and recruit again for a requirement because they've lost a candidate through a longer interview process. Last but not least, this was, of course, a pre-COVID issue. They had saved time, and they had also saved expense and logistical costs by having to, if you had a candidate that was out of market, flying that candidate in, putting them up in a hotel, making sure that everything was taken care of while they were in market. I'm going to pause for a second as a question just came in. So Beth asked a question: was there any impact to the quality of hire? It's a great question. And for the purpose of this case study, I don't know the answer to that. So apologies. I can do some research and send it back out with the deck, but I don't have any data that would say that the quality of hire was either better or worse as a result. Another question from Eddie: at the end of the day, we try to lower the costs and hopefully acquire candidates with better quality. How does video interview help the process besides saving time? It's a good question, Eddie. The main return on investment for this is time spent in recruiting. But the truth of the matter is by creating an audit trail and in capturing this stuff in video, what they were able to do is first focus on the hard skills and assuring that that person was technically qualified to do the job. And by eliminating subjectivity earlier in the process, they were able to get more qualified candidates. If you think about things like diversity and inclusion, any sort of bias or anything is largely marginalized at the front end of the process. Candidate surveys for improved experience from Chad. It's a great question. I don't have a slide on it, but at the end, number one, as a part of this process, every time a candidate goes through a video interview on the TellView platform, there is a survey at the end for both the interviewee and the interviewer. The interviewee is able to give feedback on the process. And out of a 5-star rating, this customer had an average candidate survey score of 4.2. So not always going to be the case. In this scenario, it was actually a very positive outcome. You're welcome. So the hard ROI, and there's been a couple of questions around this, which is great. You all are thinking through this the right way. The hard ROI is we saved a lot of time, and potentially we got more good candidates because we were able to move through the process faster. So that is the projected hard return on investment of this revamp of the process. There's a couple of additional values that were extracted from this process. I call this beyond the return on investment. So a couple of different things. I know that speed is not the only thing, but in this scenario for these two companies, speed really mattered. So expediting offers quickly means that they were able to beat their competition to the punch. And in this war for talent, particularly focused in the technical space here in this use case, these two customers were able to achieve that outcome. That's number one. Number two, they were able to minimize, certainly not eliminate, right? Subjective bias is a real thing, and it's probably alive and well in every recruiting process. Ours would be no different. But by putting the technical assessment further up at the beginning of the interview process, one of the takeaways was that they felt like by expanding the community that they had actually minimized subjective bias. An interviewer and an interviewee getting together and somebody being eliminated from the process because of whatever sort of subjective rationale there would be there. Third was compliance, right? So when we talk about sending a candidate an assessment, without proctoring that assessment, there can be no assurance that the candidate doesn't have help taking the assessment, that they don't actually bring somebody else in to take the assessment for them. For the one-way asynchronous video, we were able to proctor that through remote AI, which ensured compliance. The two-way video interviewing, you've actually got a person sitting there live, issuing the questions, ensuring that they are the candidate who will continue through the process. So from a compliance perspective, they felt really good about that. It creates a better overall candidate experience, and this may potentially be theoretical, but the idea that one candidate can interview with a company and not be asked back again and again to interview with different people for potentially different requirements, only to face the same questions along the way, at times can become frustrating. So the ability to save this information and reuse it for future instances created a better overall candidate experience. We believe that's what led to the 4.2 rating in this case study. And they couldn't have anticipated this at the time, but the truth of the matter is that they were building for the future. In building this process to move faster, what they did is they actually built a process that is still working very well. It's alive and well today in the current COVID era. So a quick check on time. I didn't expect that to take the full 20 minutes. There are a couple of more things here that will be shared when the deck comes out. Other video best practices. So today, brand management, employment brand is a big thing. So other best practices and ways to utilize video in the recruitment process, and you can see a list of them here, but virtual office tours. We have a lot of companies that are investing a lot of time and energy and money in the physical workspaces post-COVID. So virtual office tours, giving candidates an experience of not only the technical details of a job, but what it's actually like to work in a company. These are all usages of video that allow the candidate to, number one, have a better experience. Number two, be more informed along the way. So what does video potentially allow you to achieve as a business outcome? And this will be the last slide before we close the session. Candidates through video will have a more realistic view of the job. What it's like to interact with the people is not minimized by going to video versus face-to-face interviewing, but being able to showcase other features, other use cases of people that are doing this job at your company today and being able to share that over video, it gives them a much more realistic view of what it's like to work inside of your four walls. It does reduce the time to hire and can improve the candidate experience, which we talked about in this use case. Automating screening processes, as I touched on in the first slide, means that recruiters have more time to spend on more meaningful activities, spending time with candidates in the interview as opposed to sorting through resumes, etc. And shortlisting candidates based on their ability by assessing them first before subjectivity comes in will decrease bias in the screening process, which should lead you to a more competent but also a more diverse short list of candidates to ultimately bring into your company. So that's the end of the presentation. For those of you that are going on to another session, I really appreciate you attending. I'll hang on the line for a couple of minutes if there are any follow-up questions over the chat.